Imagine walking into your own bank, the place where your name is on the paperwork, where your money sits safely, only to have the police called on you because someone doesn't believe you belong there. That's exactly what happened to one man on what should have been an ordinary day. It started just like any other visit to the bank. A well-dressed black man stepped inside, heading toward the teller. He had business to take care of, routine, nothing out of the ordinary. But the moment he walked through those doors, something shifted. Eyes followed him, cautious glances were exchanged, and a tension settled in the air. Behind the counter, the bank manager, a middle-aged white man, watched him closely. Something about the customer seemed off to him. Maybe it was the confidence, the way he carried himself, or maybe, just maybe, it was something else entirely. As the man approached the counter, he handed over some documents. That's when things took a turn. The manager's expression tightened. His mind raced with assumptions. Could this be fraud? An attempted scam? Instead of asking questions, instead of verifying the details, he did something drastic. He quietly picked up the phone and dialed 911. Moments later, the police arrived. Officers stepped inside, their presence instantly changing the atmosphere. The man, now confused, turned to see them approaching. He had no idea why they were there, but he was about to find out in the worst way possible. What happened next left everyone in shock. The assumptions, the accusations, and the reality of the situation all came crashing down in a way that no one, not the bank manager, not the police, and certainly not the man himself, could have expected. Stay with us as we break down the full story, the misunderstanding that turned into something much bigger, and the powerful lesson hidden in it all. This is a moment that reveals so much about the world we live in, and you won't believe how it ends. The bank lobby fell silent as the officers approached. The man turned, his brow furrowed in confusion. This wasn't the first time he had been inside this bank, yet something felt different. Something was wrong. He could see the way the bank manager stood behind the counter, gripping the edge tightly, his face unreadable but tense. The tellers whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between him and the police. One of the officers cleared his throat. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions." The man's stomach tightened. He had done nothing wrong, yet he knew how quickly these situations could spiral. He had seen stories like this before, had even experienced smaller versions of it himself. But this was his own bank. "I don't understand," he said, keeping his voice calm. "What's this about?" The officers exchanged glances. "We got a call about a suspicious individual trying to conduct fraudulent activity." The words hit him like a slap. Suspicious? Fraudulent? He had just handed over his own paperwork, his own information. He felt the heat rise in his chest, but he forced himself to stay composed. "Suspicious how?" he asked, looking from the officers to the bank manager. "I've been banking here for years." The manager shifted uncomfortably, but didn't say a word. One of the tellers avoided his gaze. The silence spoke volumes. One of the officers adjusted his stance, his hand resting near his belt. "We just need to verify some information." The man exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. He could argue, demand to know why he was being treated this way, but he knew that wouldn't help. Not now. Instead, he reached into his pocket, carefully pulling out his wallet. "Here's my ID," he said, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "My business license is in the paperwork I just gave them." One of the officers took the ID, glancing at it before looking back at the manager. The hesitation in the bank manager's expression was unmistakable. It was as if, for the first time, he was beginning to doubt his own assumptions. But the damage was already done. The police were here. The customers in the bank were staring, and the man who had walked in expecting to handle his business like any other day was now standing under a microscope, treated as if he didn't belong in a place that, in reality, belonged to him. And he wasn't about to let that go unanswered. The officer studying the ID glanced back at the bank manager. This is his name. The same name on the documents you were given. The bank manager hesitated, his mouth opening slightly before closing again. His face paled, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his features. He shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. I just wanted to be cautious. We've had fraud attempts before." The bank manager looked just as surprised. "I didn't." He started, then stopped. His confusion was real, but it didn't matter. Someone, perhaps another customer, perhaps a bystander peeking in from outside, had made a second call. The damage was deepening. One of the officers brought his radio to his mouth. "Dispatch, we're already on scene." It was a false alarm. But the moment had already shifted again. The customers who had started to relax now looked unsettled all over again. Some edged toward the exit, while others kept their distance, their gazes wary. The man let out a bitter chuckle, running a hand over his face. "So even after all this, after proving exactly who I am, someone still thinks I don't belong here." His voice was steady, but there was something sharper underneath, something that cut through the air like glass. One of the officers hesitated, as if unsure what to say. But before he could respond, the doors of the bank swung open. A woman in a sharp navy blue suit stepped inside, her heels clicking against the tile. She scanned the room quickly, her eyes landing on the man. "There you are," she said, her tone brisk but professional. She turned toward the bank manager and the officers. "Is there a reason my client was just detained in his own building?" A ripple of shock moved through the room. Some of the bank employees straightened. A few customers leaned in, curious. The bank manager's face turned a deeper shade of red. "Client?" the officer nearest to her asked. "Yes." She pulled out a folder, flipping it open to reveal legal documents with the man's name on them. And not just the building, he owns several properties, including this entire complex. She snapped the folder shut. "So unless there's something else going on here, I suggest we address that asterisk." The bank manager swallowed hard. He had been caught in his own mistake, but now it was bigger than that. Now it wasn't just an accusation, it was a legal situation. And for the first time, it looked like he wasn't the one in control. The weight of the moment settled over the bank like a thick fog. The bank manager stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. The officers remained still, waiting to see how this would unfold. But the man, the actual owner of the building, had seen enough. He turned to his attorney, his voice calm but firm. "I want to know exactly what my legal options are." The bank manager's eyes widened. "Wait, there's no need for that. It was just a misunderstanding." The man let out a dry laugh. "A misunderstanding?" He gestured around the room. "I walked into my own building, handed over my paperwork, and you called the police on me without asking a single question. And even after proving who I am, someone still called dispatch to report me as a threat." He shook his head. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a problem." His attorney nodded. "And it's one we can address legally." She looked at the bank manager, then at the employees behind him. "There are consequences for making false reports, especially against the very person who holds your lease." The tension in the room was suffocating. The bank manager's confidence had vanished, replaced with sheer panic. "Look, there's no need to escalate this. I'll admit I made a mistake." His voice wavered, his hands gripping the counter. I should have verified before calling anyone. I see that now. The man studied him for a long moment. You see that asterisk now asterisk. His voice was measured, but there was no mistaking the anger beneath it. The only reason you're saying that is because you got caught. The manager flinched. The man exhaled, shaking his head. He could take this further, press charges, take legal action, make this bank pay for what had just happened. But then something caught his eye. An employee, one of the tellers, stood slightly apart from the others. She looked nervous, but she also looked disappointed. Not just in her boss, but in the situation itself. And then he noticed some of the customers. People who had watched everything happen, but said nothing. Some still looked uneasy, but others looked guilty, as if realizing too late that they should have spoken up. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't just about the bank manager. It was about the culture that allowed this to happen in the first place, the silent assumptions, the hesitation to question authority, the willingness to look away until it was too late. He turned back to his attorney. I want a meeting with the regional director of this bank. The manager blinked in surprise. What? You heard me, the man said. I could take legal action, but honestly, I'm more interested in making sure this never happens again. And that starts at the top. His attorney nodded, already making notes. I'll set it up. The bank manager sagged in relief, but the man wasn't finished. He turned back to the officers. And as for whoever made that second call to dispatch, I want to know if there's a record of it. The officer hesitated, then nodded. We can look into that. The man nodded back. He wasn't just going to walk away from this. He was going to make sure everyone from the bank manager to the corporate office to the anonymous caller, understood exactly what had happened here. And this time, no one would be able to look away. The tension in the bank had shifted. The fear and confusion that had filled the air minutes ago were now replaced with something else. Reflection, discomfort, maybe even regret. The bank manager stood stiffly behind the counter, his face unreadable. The officers, now more at ease, exchanged a glance before one of them spoke. We'll pull the records and follow up, the officer said. If there was another call made, we'll find out who placed it. The man nodded. Good. He wasn't going to let this moment slip away. He had walked in expecting to handle his business, but instead, he had been forced to defend his own identity. That wasn't something he could just forget. And he wouldn't let anyone else forget it either. His attorney tucked her folder under her arm and turned to him. I'll push for that meeting with the regional director. If they take this seriously, there's an opportunity to change how things are handled moving forward. The man gave a small nod. That's what I want. Change. The bank manager exhaled shakily. I'll make sure they know you expect a meeting. His voice had lost all its authority. The man held his gaze for a moment before turning to leave. The weight of the stairs followed him as he walked toward the door. But just before he reached it, a voice called out. Sir. He turned. It was the young teller who had spoken up earlier. She looked nervous, but her expression was sincere. I'm really sorry about what happened, she said softly. It wasn't right. For the first time that day, something shifted inside him. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to understanding. He gave her a small nod. Thank you. And then he stepped outside, the fresh air hitting him like a reminder that the world kept moving. That even after moments like these, there was still work to do. As he walked toward his car, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Hey, he said when the call connected. I need you to come by the bank tomorrow. We're going to have a meeting, and I want you there. The voice on the other end hesitated. Everything okay? The man looked back at the building, at the glass doors reflecting the afternoon sun. "Not yet," he said, "but it will be." The man's jaw tightened. Cautious? His voice was measured, controlled, but there was no mistaking the edge beneath it. "You saw me walk in. I handed over my paperwork, my identification, everything. At what point did I look like someone committing fraud?" The manager looked away, suddenly finding the floor more interesting. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the customers in the bank whispered among themselves. Some were still watching, their eyes darting between the man and the officers. Others pretended not to notice, shifting nervously, waiting for this uncomfortable moment to pass. But one woman, an older customer sitting in a chair near the entrance, shook her head. "I've seen him in here before," she muttered, just loud enough for those around her to hear. "He's been coming here for years." The officer holding the ID sighed, turning back to the man. "Sir, do you own a business?" The man exhaled sharply, biting back the frustration rising in his throat. "Yes," he said, forcing himself to stay calm. "And not just any business. I own this asterisk building." The room went still. Even the tellers stopped moving. The bank manager stiffened, his face suddenly drained of color. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You own this building?" The man nodded slowly, watching the reaction unfold in front of him. "I own this property. My company leases space to this bank. You can check the records." The bank manager's mouth opened, but no words came out. The weight of his mistake crashed down on him in real time, visible in the way his hands fidgeted, in the way his entire demeanor shifted from authority to uncertainty. The officers exchanged glances. One of them spoke into his radio, quietly confirming details. The other turned back to the bank manager. "You called 911 on the owner of the building." His tone wasn't accusatory, just incredulous, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The manager swallowed hard. I didn't know." But it was too late for excuses. The damage was already done. And now everyone was watching to see what would happen next. The weight of the moment pressed down on the bank manager as the officer's question lingered in the air. His throat felt dry, and he could feel the eyes of the entire bank on him. The man, the rightful owner of the building, stood still, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his stance spoke volumes. The officer handed back the ID, his gaze steady. "Sir, I'm sorry for the confusion." His voice was neutral, but there was something else there too, an unspoken understanding of just how badly this had gone. The man took his ID without breaking eye contact with the bank manager. "Confusion," he repeated, rolling the word over in his mouth like it was something foreign. He let out a slow breath, shaking his head. That's one way to put it. A murmur spread through the lobby. Customers whispered in hushed tones, some exchanging glances, others staring outright. The tension hadn't lifted, it had only shifted. The bank manager, still reeling, finally spoke. I was just following protocol. We've had suspicious activity before, and I thought." He stopped himself, realizing too late that there was no way to explain his actions without making them sound worse. The man took a step closer, his voice low but firm. "You thought what asterisk? That I didn't belong here. That I couldn't possibly be the owner of this building." The manager's lips pressed into a thin line. He had no good answer, no way to take back what had already happened. One of the tellers, a younger woman who had been quiet through the whole ordeal, finally spoke up. "He's right. He's been coming here for years." Her voice was hesitant, but she looked at the man with something close to apology in her eyes. "We've seen him before." The bank manager flinched. He had been so certain, so quick to assume, that he hadn't stopped to think. The man inhaled deeply, glancing around at the people watching. This moment was bigger than just him. It was about what had just played out in front of everyone. The ease with which he had been turned into a suspect, the way his authority had been stripped away in an instant. He straightened, his voice carrying through the room. "You called the police on the person who signs your lease," he said, shaking his head. "And you didn't even stop to ask a single question first." The silence that followed was deafening. And then, just as the weight of it all seemed to settle, he added, "So tell me, what happens next?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The bank manager shifted, his face still pale, his hands gripping the counter as if it might steady him. But before he could say anything, one of the officer's radios crackled to life. "Dispatch to Unit 7. We've got a report of a possible suspect matching your location. A call just came in about a man causing a disturbance at the bank."